last, my arm is complete again.
Success in Hollywood isn't destroyed by failure, it's destroyed by uncertainty. Studios can survive a box office bomb, a bad review cycle, even a damaged franchise. What they can't tolerate is risk they can't control. And for years, Johnny Depp was the opposite of risk. He was a brand, a guaranteed draw, a movie star whose name alone justified massive budgets. Then that certainty disappeared, and once it did, everything changed. Johnny Depp's rise wasn't built on traditional leading man roles. Early in his career, he positioned himself as an outsider, favoring strange, unconventional characters over safe commercial choices. That image paid off when he formed a long-running creative partnership with Tim Burton, delivering performances that were eccentric but controlled. Films like Edward Scissorhands established him as someone who could be weird without alienating audiences. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Depp had something rare: critical respect and mainstream appeal existing at the same time. That balance exploded into full superstardom with Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Captain Jack Sparrow wasn't just a successful character, it became a cultural phenomenon. Depp turned a potentially disposable pirate movie into a billion-dollar franchise centerpiece. The performance earned awards recognition, massive global popularity, and long-term studio trust. At that point, Depp wasn't simply cast in movies. Entire projects were designed around him. His eccentricity was no longer a risk. It was the selling point. For several years, the industry treated Depp as untouchable. He led major franchises, commanded enormous salaries, and enjoyed a level of creative freedom reserved for very few actors. But beneath that success, warning signs were quietly forming. Box office results outside of Pirates became inconsistent. Some passion projects underperformed. Studios tolerated this because the overall brand still worked. As long as Depp remained a reliable public figure, the math still made sense. The real shift didn't come from one bad movie, it came from public perception. As Depp's personal life began dominating headlines, the conversation around him changed. Studios don't wait for final outcomes, they respond to momentum. As media coverage intensified and public narratives became volatile, Depp's name started representing unpredictability rather than value. That shift matters more than any single allegation or defense. Hollywood operates on optics long before verdicts. By the mid-2010s, the situation had escalated into legal conflict that fully overtook his professional identity. The lawsuits weren't just court cases, they became global media events. Depp was no longer being discussed primarily as an actor, but as a central figure in a cultural and legal controversy. For studios, this was a nightmare scenario. Regardless of where the truth landed, the brand damage was already happening in real time. The impact was immediate. Projects stalled. Relationships with major franchises weakened. Depp was removed from high-profile roles as companies prioritized damage control over loyalty. This wasn't a judgment on guilt or innocence. It was a calculation. Studios insure productions. Insurers hate instability. Once that instability appears, decisions are made quickly and quietly. The industry moved on while the legal battles dragged forward. When the Virginia defamation trial concluded in 2022, it marked a turning point publicly, but not professionally. The verdict generated massive online reaction, but Hollywood doesn't reset careers overnight. Years of stalled momentum don't reverse with one courtroom win. By that point, Depp had already been absent from major studio pipelines for too long. Younger actors had replaced him. Franchises had restructured without him. The machine had adjusted. That gap matters. In Hollywood, absence creates distance, and distance kills leverage. Depp's comeback wasn't blocked, but it was reshaped. Instead of returning to blockbuster leads, his re-entry came through international cinema and smaller, prestige-focused projects. His appearance in Jean du Barry signaled visibility, not dominance. It showed that doors weren't closed, but they were narrower. Behind the scenes, Depp's career strategy shifted. More control, more selective projects, less reliance on studio systems that had already recalculated him as a liability. That shift wasn't a victory lap. It was adaptation, the kind that happens when the industry no longer chases you, but allows you to participate on new terms. The downfall of Johnny Depp wasn't a sudden collapse, it was erosion, a gradual transformation from guaranteed asset to complicated risk. Fame amplified everything, success, failure, and controversy alike. Once the balance tipped, the industry responded exactly as it always does. It didn't take sides. It minimized exposure. And that's the reality of Hollywood power. It doesn't destroy careers with outrage, it sidelines them with silence. Johnny Depp's career didn't end with a verdict, it entered a different phase, one defined by caution rather than confidence. The public reaction to the trial created the impression of a triumphant return, but Hollywood doesn't operate on viral moments, it operates on long-term reliability. While audiences debated morality and fairness, studios focused on something else entirely. Whether attaching Depp's name to a project still made business sense. The problem wasn't that Depp became unemployable, it was that he became expensive to justify. Big studios don't just hire actors, they manage risk across marketing, international distribution, insurance, and brand partnerships. Depp's controversy didn't exist in isolation. It followed him into every boardroom discussion, every financing conversation, every casting decision. Even when sentiment shifted in his favor, uncertainty remained baked into the equation. This is where timing mattered most. Depp lost momentum during a period when Hollywood was already changing. Franchises were tightening control, streaming platforms were reshaping star power, younger actors were being positioned as long-term investments. While Depp fought legal battles, the industry filled the vacuum. Once that happens, returning to the same level becomes exponentially harder. Unlike earlier eras, modern blockbusters are less dependent on individual stars. Intellectual property matters more than names. Depp's greatest leverage once came from his ability to anchor franchises. By the time he was ready to re-emerge, those franchises had evolved or moved on entirely. The industry didn't need him in the way it once did. His post-trial projects reflected this new reality. They weren't attempts to reclaim dominance, they were recalibrations. Smaller budgets, international productions, creative control instead of studio backing. This wasn't a fall from grace so much as a forced reinvention. Depp shifted from being a centerpiece to being a collaborator, from guaranteed draw to selective presence. There's also the issue of narrative fatigue. Hollywood can handle controversy, but it rarely revisits it willingly. Depp's story had been told, dissected, memed, and argued to exhaustion. For studios, reopening that conversation offered little upside. Even positive attention carried the risk of reigniting debate. Silence became the safer option. That's why the idea of a full-scale comeback was always misleading. Depp didn't vanish, but he didn't regain his former standing either. His career stabilized at a lower altitude. That outcome isn't unique. It's the standard trajectory for stars whose public identity overwhelms their professional output. The work becomes secondary to the narrative surrounding it. It's also important to understand what didn't cause the downfall. It wasn't a lack of talent. Depp remains a capable performer. It wasn't a single bad role or creative misstep. It wasn't even one legal loss or win. The damage came from prolonged exposure to instability, from years where the industry couldn't predict what would happen next. Hollywood rewards consistency above all else. Depp's greatest strength was once his unpredictability on screen. Off-screen, that same unpredictability became a liability. The line between persona and personal life blurred, and once that happens, studios stop gambling. There's a certain irony in how it all unfolded. Depp built his career by rejecting traditional stardom. He avoided safe roles, leaned into eccentricity, and challenged expectations. That approach made him iconic. But when the system shifted and tolerance narrowed, those same traits left him without a safety net. When controversy hit, there was no conventional image to fall back on. The industry didn't punish him. It adjusted around him. That distinction matters. Careers aren't usually destroyed by force. They fade when the environment changes and adaptation comes too late. Depp adapted, but only after losing years of momentum. By then, the peak was unreachable. What remains is a legacy split in two. On one side, a catalog of performances that defined an era. On the other, a cautionary example of how fame magnifies everything, including damage. Depp didn't lose relevance overnight. He lost insulation. And once that insulation was gone, every shock hit harder. The downfall of Johnny Depp isn't about a single event or a simple verdict. It's about how power operates in entertainment. About how quickly certainty turns into hesitation. About how a global icon can become a complicated decision. In the end, Depp wasn't erased, he was repositioned. And in Hollywood, that distinction is the difference between superstardom and survival.